All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us in a conversation today on AI in healthcare as part of the health track at Boise Startup Week. I'm Chris Hoyd, Director of Product at Vynyl, which is a product development firm that works with clients in the healthcare industry. And I'm joined today by Lauren Pfeifer, a venture capital investor at Maschmeyer Group Ventures in San Francisco. Lauren, can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And hello, everyone. So I'm Lauren Pfeifer, as Chris mentioned. Went to Bishop Kelly. So in case anyone's wondering where the Idaho affiliation is coming from, there you have it. I'm currently a VC investor, as Chris said, at MGV or Maschmeyer Group Ventures, in case anyone wants to practice their German. We're an early seed stage startup VC fund in San Francisco, mainly within the city, but we focus on the North American market. So any company that's in the pre-seed, seed, seed 2, or smaller Series A stage, industry agnostic. So that means we don't really focus on one specific industry. We focus on a multitude of different verticals. So a couple of examples of verticals that we've invested in are mental health, digital health plays as well, to NLP for insurance and fintech industry applications, to even a handful of consumer fashion plays. And for those that don't know, there are a ton of investors in the Bay Area, each one having a different specialization. But the thing that we really focus on with our portfolio companies is sales. So it doesn't matter what stage you're at, we help our founders build out their sales playbook. We help our founders also hire their first sales team and build the team out. And I'd say the most important thing that we do in terms of transitioning is teaching the co-founding team about sales and then transitioning that over to the sales team once that's built out. So that's us in a nutshell. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. So you've developed some deep expertise in healthcare, and over the last few years, you've also, really studied, machine learning and AI and what's going on in that space. So maybe to kind of level set for our audience, can you just give us a brief definition of what is AI?
Yeah, so it's a pretty contentious question, but I always default to the experts, right? And in my mind, Andrew Ng, he's a Stanford professor, also the founder of Coursera. He breaks down the definition of artificial intelligence into two subcategories. So there's artificial narrow intelligence, which is you have a machine and you have that machine perform one single task. So whether that's driving an autonomous vehicle on the road, to having a chatbot or a virtual agent talk with customers. And then there's the other category, which is artificial general intelligence, which is where a lot of the hype factor comes from. And that's having a machine emulate and actually perform all of the tasks that humans can do. So Andrew always talks about the contentions between that, saying we're not at AGI yet, artificial general intelligence, but a lot of people, when they think of AI, they think of Terminator and killer robots, but to each their own on how close or how far we are from that. But I would say where AI currently is right now, it's more focused in the realm of artificial narrow intelligence.
Interesting. Okay, cool. All right. So AI is a little bit of a buzzword. There's a lot going on in the space right now, like you said. Also a ton going on in healthcare and health tech right now. So, this is a tricky question, but I'm curious your take on it. How is AI going to make us healthier?
That is, I think, a question of the ages, right? I mean, there's so many, we're in a pandemic right now, right? And so there's a lot of governments, in case, for those that haven't really been paying attention on the global level outside of the US, you see examples of countries like Israel or countries in Southeast Asia implementing contact tracing. So they're using, AI technologies or machine learning and trying to input as much information as possible to see what the likelihood of COVID outbreaks are in certain parts of town. And so, for example, Israel using geolocation and tracking, okay, this person tested positive for COVID. Where were they at? How many people were they in contact with at this location? There are a lot of big question marks, right? And so I think the big question that a lot of people, it boils down to is what data is being used to make, your life or your country's life or your, respective geography or demographics live healthier. And how, like, what's the give and take, right? There's always a cost and benefit analysis. And so happy to expand more on in terms of like where the like leading innovations are taking place. I'll say like one big example in terms of like where AI is making strides is you look at diagnostics, especially with radiology images or X-ray images. And there's two examples, right? So one is a recent example of COVID. You have a handful of medical institutions gathering all these images of people's chest X-rays and generating some algorithms to more efficiently, like in a really, really quick turnaround time, detect if someone has COVID. And it's based on, the chest X-ray. It shows these little shards that kind of look like glass, right? Or these little nodules that look like glass shards. And that would be categorized as somebody that likely needs to get tested or run more further tests and get the confirmation of whether this is COVID or not. And it's the turnaround time, I'd say, is like the key thing that has been really, really optimized or enhanced. The other example I was going to mention is China. And so there was a guy from Google Brain. He was an MD, I forget his name, a couple years ago, but he gave a talk saying how China is really, really putting a lot of their efforts and capital into breast cancer detection, and how they're making strides is because that a lot of people that have this disease are open to giving their information and their scans and their images to these doctors and to these institutes to better quickly and more rapidly detect breast cancer through X-ray images. Here in the US, it's becoming more and more efficient and people are warming up to this idea. But again, it's this question of like privacy, like, what are you going to do with my images? Like, I don't know that I trust a machine to like detect, diagnose me with cancer. And I think that people still, people still realize that there's, a human in the loop, usually a team of physicians that are still like running through the data and the outputs and saying like, okay, yeah, actually this is quite, indeed a malignant or benign tumor. So.
You kind of just touched on this to some extent, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on whether AI will allow us to allow humans to live meaningfully longer lives.
I think the key word is, and again, my personal opinion is meaningful, right? So what does that mean? Does that mean like having to actually do what you want, spend time, doing the things that you're passionate about and not having to work your 9-to-5 job? And if so, that app opens up this whole can of worm, Pandora's box concept of automation and people being automated out of jobs. Again, to give another example about robotics, since people love to like harp on robotics and, there's that whole concept of like plumber Joe, getting replaced from his job because a robot can now fix your plumbing system. We're not there yet, but the big question I think is around meaningful, right? And it's AI and robotics are being applied to multiple verticals. So more and more within like the insurance realm, you're seeing, and this is just one example from the insurance realm because, it's a very old kind of like archaic, undisrupted type of vertical, like where they're losing so many millions and nearly billions of dollars on claims fraud, right? So you have people scamming the system and getting money, and that's something, that's not in their best interests, right? But they've developed using computer vision and using NLP, they developed these systems to detect like, okay, what's the highest, is this like a fraudulent claim and is this not? And so that's one example. But like the goal of them doing this is to, there is the one case of displacing people that were doing this manually, yes, but like on the other hand, you're seeing more and more companies or even like verticals retraining those people that were displaced and upskilling them with more technical skills or upskilling them by having them take classes in marketing, to web development, to UX, to even online product schools. And again, it's like a chicken and the egg situation, like, right, who's better off and, how much will this improve like the bottom line? It really depends on like the perspective that it's coming from.
Okay, cool. So more to come on that one. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think most of our viewers, here in the States would probably agree with the premise of this next question, that our healthcare system here is complex and maybe overly so. Have you, seen anything either as an investor or as kind of a, someone who's looking into the actual AI engineering? You seen anything that could, maybe help improve or simplify our healthcare system?
That is a very multifaceted question. And I'll start with mental health first and foremost. I'll start with mental health, and then I'll touch on telemedicine, which I think has literally been a game changer for providing quality care. And quality, again, is a keyword. But mental health in terms of like accessibility and, people even knowing, if they are lucky enough to be covered in their employee benefits. So one example is our portfolio company, Modern Health, and what they do. It's a B2B SaaS play. They offer mental health solutions for enterprise companies where, hey, if you or a family member needs access to a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist, you can do it through this very seamless, anonymized platform and get what you need in terms of any type of solution addressed on the mental health front. And it's, don't have to fill out complex paperwork. The information is already there, everything you need to know. And I think you're seeing more and more of these type of solutions really trying to bridge the gap between people's needs, especially in the mental health space. And so that's like one example. And then I'd say another example is there was this whole wave a couple years ago of chatbots, right? Because, behavioral therapy, mental health solutions, there was just this massive gap, right? In terms of people like, I need to see a therapist. Do I need to see a therapist? There's a stigma around it. Like, I might be depressed, but like, I don't want to like pay for the medicines I need. Like there's, how much is this going to cost me essentially? And so the wave of mental health chatbots like Wobot that came out of Stanford, which is predominantly used for Gen Z youth and millennial aged, I'd say, demographics now, really, really helped bridge that gap in terms of combating anxiety and depression within like people under the age of 30. And you're seeing more and more plays. This was a couple years ago when it was like a huge trend of other chatbots being deployed within Facebook Messenger. I think it's called X.AI or something along those lines, where it was being deployed within like a company's chat server, and a person could talk to this like it was a chatbot, but like, hey, I'm having an anxiety attack right now, and the chatbot would kind of talk you through the trigger. It would triage certain solutions that would hopefully get you out of that like negative feedback loop. But in terms of like the really, really complex healthcare system that we have, it's hard to say. There's a program that the government has called the Presidential Fellows, right? Like where they take industry experts from innovation and technology and they task them to a certain like division or government agency and say, hey, we need help with this. There have been a couple people that have tried to do that, not tried, but are currently doing that with the current healthcare system. But I still think it's like rife for improvements, right? Because it is what we have right now. And there are a handful of startups that are trying to be transparent and just like a go-to resource. I like Stride Health. You might need to edit this one out because I need to double check the company name. You type it in, like if you're on Obamacare and you say like, okay, this is your plan. These are all your coverages and whatnot. Now, the big question is like, what do these companies do with your data? And I think that opens up another big concern of like, oh boy, is this data going to be used against me, especially for like higher premiums for health insurance and whatnot. So,
right.
Yeah.
Oh man, there's a lot going on in this space right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Mostly encouraging though. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So you touched on this, I think, a little bit earlier when you talked about kind of our, new technological capabilities when it comes to sort of identifying, a disease or something as it might be spreading through a community. But I'm curious, are there other ways that AI could, improve the health of our community?
Absolutely. So I touched, on mental health, but I think a big area that, we've seen kind of with the pandemic is how powerful computer vision, so that's like a subcategory of artificial intelligence, how powerful computer vision can be for the realm of infectious diseases. And so I'll share a couple of the projects that I worked with personally. So one of the more recent projects I worked on, there's this startup called Zap Malaria based in Israel. It takes geospatial data and assesses in a certain area that has really, really high cases of malaria, like let's find the bodies of water. And if so, let's find the bodies of water using satellite data and hone in on this area. They then dispatch this information to field workers in these areas to go and check the smaller bodies of water. And those are the ones where a lot of the malaria mosquitoes, it's like, an ideal breeding ground, right? And so they go and confirm based on the satellite data if there are actually mosquitoes there breeding. And then they also can then dispatch doctors, type of anti-malarial type of drugs, as well as mosquito nets there. And I think this is a really, really powerful solution that doesn't require much effort and can be easily scaled and deployed. There's been a ton of research, especially within the last decade, on the computer vision front in terms of building solutions for these type of solutions for identifying even the type of mosquito. Like, so for example, another use of computer vision is when the Zika virus was quite rampant in Brazil. I think the government launched an application that said, like, how do I know if this is a mosquito that's in my house? Take a picture of it and confirm whether it's the breed that actually carries the Zika virus. And that informs, the household to decide, like, whether they need to go get tested, whether they need to go see if they need to acquire medication or just the right type of treatment. And so these are really, really powerful areas where I think, not only for malaria, but for other insect-borne illnesses can hopefully make a lot of change in terms of eradicating these diseases.
Wow, that is super powerful. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've touched on some really cool new applications of this rapidly changing technology, and I guess in their own way, each of them is a pretty ambitious undertaking. But I'm curious if there are some that really even stand out to you as like just super exciting, really ambitious. Anything that's really stood out to you?
I'd say the field, and it's a bit outside of my wheelhouse, but like the field of molecular machine learning. So this is a handful of institutions now are doing these simulations. I think it's Microsoft. If you look up what Microsoft and their AI team is doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they mapped out the entire immune system and are doing these simulations of testing, okay, here's a drug that we're going to do. Will this drug work and what's the likelihood? And it kind of ties in as well to precision medicine, right? So if this person has, A, B, and C type of conditions, whether it's diabetes, whether it's like, an autoimmune condition, this type of medicine, or even if it's an allergy, will it work? And what will be the simulated outcome? And so you're seeing more and more of these type of plays, especially not thanks to COVID, but especially like with the pandemic that we're in, showing so much more promise. I'd say the other bigger question is like, this is going to require like a ton of data and a ton of very, very specific type of industry experts to run these. And so I applaud Microsoft for taking on and making these advancements. I just hope that these type of solutions can be tested and deployed on a global level, like to the demographics that need it most. So I think that's really, really exciting.
That is super cool. Interesting. Okay, well, we've talked about a lot of what we have to look forward to with AI as it might apply to our health or our community's health or our healthcare system. But what are some of the things that we should maybe be concerned about as AI does start to kind of permeate, all of our touch points and our personal health?
Yeah. So the big, there's always these big three concepts, right, that pop up, whether it's in the media or whether it's at like, AI-centric academic conferences, and it's data privacy, it's bias reduction, and then also transparency. And they kind of tie into each other. And so data privacy, you've seen a lot of, for anyone that has seen the documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Where does this data go? Like, how is it being used? There was a study, I forget, maybe it was University of Washington, that, looked at all these terms and agreements and privacy and like data usage policies. And the results of this study said, like, hey, for a person to actually understand and comprehend these like what's going on in these documents needs not only a law degree, but like that type of level of like a secondary education to understand these. And for those that don't have legal degrees like yourself, it's essentially like translating another language. And and so that's one of the bigger questions is like, okay, yeah, you checked the box when you downloaded this app, but it's all on you, right? For not being in the know. And that's just like one example, right? Especially when it's, and thankfully you have HIPAA and whatnot. And California now is trying to enforce the California Consumer Privacy Act. Consumers, it's general, but like, you can consume certain type of mental health solutions as well. And that's one of the bigger questions. The other question is, I would say transparency and bias reduction. And so you have all these really awesome solutions. Like I mentioned, the computer vision applications. And one example that I'm working on personally right now is, how to identify a skin lesion from a tick bite, right? And there's this whole other like massive can of worms type of discussion around whether an algorithm can identify, like, for example, a skin lesion or a tick bite on darker skin. And where do you get this data if you don't have it? And if you do, for example, for this project, like we, did a handful of Google searches. By handful, I mean like we acquired thousands and thousands of images, but the end result like was still the skin was not representative of like the population that we're trying to gauge. And so now the bigger question is like, where do we go to find that data? And, because you're, obtaining the data from somebody, you want to make sure that like they are that they are in the know about where their data is going. And if they're open and willingly sharing their images for, to, help people with tick-borne diseases and whatnot. And there was a huge study at MIT done a couple of years ago saying like, hey, an algorithm incorrectly classified somebody with darker skin, not okay. And if you look up the Algorithmic Justice League, like that's the whole crux of what they're doing in their work. And they are growing more and more data sets that can then be leveraged to different verticals, which is amazing. And then transparency, I think, ties in heavily to like bias reduction, right? Like, again, with not knowing the legal terms and guidelines that are being given to you whenever you download an app, how do you know where any of this is going? And I think more on like the policy side of things, like this is where the policymakers kind of have the final say, right? Like, hey, you tech companies, you created these technologies, it's going to be helping all these people. However, it's not transparent. Show us what data set you used when you built this algorithm. And you're like, oh, we can't because it's proprietary. It's like, no. Like somebody died because of this. Or like one example is Instagram a couple of years ago really made this push to, help reduce the number of language used from younger users, right? Who seem to be very, very depressed. And Facebook was doing very similar research as well on this. And the question was, okay, if you have people posting images of like post self-harm actions, like, what do you do? What's the intervention? And, the larger macro level question around this is like, how transparent do you need to be, right? Because you run into other legal stipulations, like this is somebody under the age of 18, so you need parental consent on whether this image should be used for, making sure that Instagram overall really has like best practices and procedures in place to like help reduce, at least pop up a prompt saying like, hey, we noticed that you posted an image that used blah, blah, blah type of sad language. Are you okay? If not, here's the suicide prevention hotline. And that's taken like the last few years of like trial and error to really, really put practices in place. And that's just like one example, right?
Yeah.
So that's a long-winded answer.
Yeah. No, that was great. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that, probably covers the survey. We've touched on a couple of the cool projects that you are working on. I think we're about out of time. So thank you so much, Lauren. Privileged to be able to pick your brain today. So thank you so much, Lauren. That was awesome. And thanks to our audience here for attending. We hope you all enjoy the rest of Boise Startup Week.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye.